The last thing I saw before the world went black was my wife, Janet, standing over me with a cold, unreadable expression, a heavy glass vase in her hand. I woke up to the blinding fluorescent lights of a hospital room, a throbbing pain in my head, and a detective asking me if I wanted to press charges against my wife for attempted murder. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Janet, my Janet, who cried when she accidentally stepped on a snail, had tried to kill me. It made no sense. The detective explained that a neighbor had heard a crash and my scream, and found me unconscious on our living room floor, bleeding from a head wound. Janet was gone. My mind reeled, trying to piece together the fragments of that night. We had been arguing. It was the 10th anniversary of our first date, and I had come home late from work, again. I was an architect, drowning under the pressure of a major project, and I had forgotten. She was dressed up, a fancy dinner getting cold on the table. The disappointment in her eyes was a physical blow. "You don't see me anymore, do you, Jimmy?" she had whispered, her voice trembling. The argument escalated from there. I was defensive, tired, and cruel. I said things I didn't mean, things about her struggling art gallery, about her being too sensitive. I remember her picking up the crystal vase I had bought her years ago, her knuckles white. I remember shouting, "What are you going to do, hit me with that?" And then, nothing. Just darkness. I refused to press charges. I told the police it was an accident, that I must have slipped and hit my head. They were skeptical, but they couldn't force me. As soon as I was discharged, I went back to our empty house. It was a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape. But it was also my home, and every corner of it ached with her absence. My best friend, Michael, tried to talk sense into me. "She tried to kill you, Jimmy. Are you insane?" But I couldn't accept it. This wasn't the woman I had loved for over a decade. Something was terribly wrong. I had to find her. I had to understand why. My search for Janet began not as a quest for justice, but as a desperate attempt to find the woman I married, believing she was lost somewhere inside the stranger who had left me for dead. My search began in the ruins of our life together. After the police finished their investigation and removed the tape, I walked back into our house. The living room was a mess of overturned furniture and shattered crystal from the vase. A dark stain marked the spot on the hardwood floor where my head had hit. It felt like walking into a ghost story, and I was the ghost. I spent the first few days in a daze, mechanically cleaning up the debris, trying to erase the physical evidence of that night, as if doing so could erase the event itself. Every shard of glass I swept up felt like a piece of our shared history, now broken beyond repair. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a constant reminder of Janet's last act before she vanished. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the gaping wound in my soul. How could the woman I had shared my bed with, my dreams with, my entire adult life with, be capable of such violence? Janet and I were a classic case of opposites attract. We met in a collegiate architectural history course, a class I was taking for my major and she was taking as an elective. I was Jimmy, the quiet, studious boy who sat in the back, my notebooks filled with meticulous sketches of Gothic arches and Doric columns. I was precise, logical, a man who believed in blueprints and solid foundations. My world was one of straight lines and right angles. Then there was Janet. She was a whirlwind of color and chaos in my monochrome existence. An art major, she would breeze into class late, her arms smudged with charcoal or paint, her hair a beautiful mess, and she would challenge the professor on the emotional resonance of a building's facade. She saw poetry where I saw physics. She felt the soul of a structure while I was calculating its load-bearing capacity. She was everything I was not, spontaneous, passionate, and gloriously unpredictable. I was captivated from the first moment she spoke. For an entire semester, I watched her from afar, too intimidated to even say hello. It was Michael, my roommate and friend since kindergarten, who finally pushed me into her path. Michael was the kind of effortlessly charming guy who could talk to anyone. He saw me sketching a portrait of Janet instead of the Parthenon and just laughed. "Dude, you're hopeless," he'd said, grabbing my sketchbook. The next day, he walked right up to her, showed her the drawing, and introduced me as the tortured artist who was too shy to speak to her. I was mortified, but Janet just smiled, a radiant, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "I think it's beautiful," she said, looking at my sketch. "You captured the light. Most people don't see that." That was the beginning. Our first date was a walk through an old sculpture garden, where we talked for hours. I learned that her passion was matched only by her kindness, and she learned that beneath my quiet exterior was a world of dreams I had never shared with anyone. We fell in love somewhere between a bronze statue and a blooming rose garden. We married 3 years later, in 1998, and for 10 years, our opposing natures complemented each other perfectly. She softened my hard edges, and I provided the anchor for her creative spirit. I built our life on a solid foundation, and she filled it with art, laughter, and unpredictable joy. Now, that foundation was shattered. I called her parents, her friends, anyone I could think of. They were all as shocked as I was. No one had heard from her. Her mother sobbed over the phone, begging me to tell her what had happened, what had gone wrong with her daughter. I had no answers. I visited her art gallery, a small, chic space she had poured her heart and soul into for the past 2 years. It was closed, a sign on the door reading, "Closed for renovations." The landlord told me she had paid her rent for the next 3 months in cash, the day before our fight. This was premeditated. The thought sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a planned departure. Michael was my rock during this time, but he was also the voice of a reality I didn't want to face. "You have to accept it, Jimmy," he said one evening, as we sat in my silent living room. "The Janet we knew is gone. You need to protect yourself." He had his own theory. He thought she had snapped under the financial pressure of the gallery, that she was in debt and saw my life insurance policy as a way out. The idea was so monstrous, so alien to the woman I loved, that I refused to even consider it. "That's not her." I yelled at him, my voice raw. "You think she's a monster, but you don't know her like I do." Our friendship, which had been a constant my entire life, began to fray under the strain. He wanted me to be safe, I wanted him to have faith. Work was my only escape, a place where logic still reigned and problems had solutions. My boss was understanding and gave me time off, but I went back sooner than I should have, needing the distraction. That's where Clara came in. Clara was a junior architect at my firm, bright, ambitious, and incredibly talented. We had been assigned to the same high-profile museum project, and now, with me falling behind, she was picking up the slack. She was quiet and observant, and she watched me with a deep, unspoken sympathy in her eyes. She never mentioned what happened, never asked probing questions. Instead, she would just leave a fresh cup of coffee on my desk in the morning or offer to take over a tedious part of the project. "You look exhausted, Jimmy," she said one day, her voice soft. "Let me handle the zoning permits. I know they're a nightmare." Her quiet competence was a relief. She didn't offer pity, she offered practical help. She was a calm port in my raging storm. We started working late together, the silent camaraderie a comfort. In the quiet hours of the night, surrounded by blueprints and models, I could almost forget the chaos of my life. Clara was logical, her mind as ordered as my own. Talking to her about design and structure felt familiar and safe. She was a reminder of the man I used to be before my world was turned upside down. I knew Michael would have warned me against it, would have seen it as a betrayal of Janet. But Janet had tried to kill me. Or so everyone believed. As I spent more time with Clara, a dangerous thought began to take root in my mind. Maybe this was my chance to build a new life, on a new foundation, one that couldn't be shattered by a single, violent act. The search for answers became an obsession that consumed my every waking moment. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled, world-weary man named Mr. Harrison, who listened to my story with a cynical expression. I insisted that Janet was not a criminal, that she was in trouble or had suffered some kind of breakdown. He just nodded and took my money, promising to look into her financials and track her last known movements. While he chased paper trails, I chased ghosts. I drove to all our old haunts, the sculpture garden where we had our first date, the tiny Italian restaurant where I proposed, the lookout point over the city where we used to watch the sunset. I half expected to find her there, waiting for me, ready to explain the nightmare we were living. But all I found were memories that now felt tainted, like scenes from someone else's life. The conflict began not with a single event, but with a slow, creeping poison that seeped into my soul. The poison was doubt. The more I searched for the Janet I knew, the more I was confronted with a woman I didn't recognize at all. Mr. Harrison's first report landed on my desk like a bomb. Janet's art gallery was more than just struggling, It was a financial disaster. She was in debt, deep in debt, to the tune of nearly $100,000. She had taken out high-interest loans from shady lenders, and they had started calling her, threatening her. The renovations at her gallery were a lie. The landlord had started eviction proceedings. She had hidden all of this from me. For years, I had handled our finances, ensuring we were stable and secure. When she started the gallery, she insisted on managing its books herself. It was her dream, her project, and she wanted to prove she could do it on her own. I had respected that, proud of her independence. Now, I saw it as the first brick in a wall she had been building between us. The secrecy was a betrayal far deeper than any financial trouble. Why wouldn't she tell me? Did she think I would judge her? Or was our marriage not the partnership I believed it to be? This discovery lent a horrifying credibility to Michael's theory. He didn't say, "I told you so," but it was written all over his face. "Think about it, Jimmy," he argued one night, his voice low and urgent. "She's desperate. She's in over her head with dangerous people. She hits you, makes it look like a domestic dispute gone wrong, and disappears. If you had died, she would have collected $2 million. It would solve all her problems." I felt sick. The logic was cold and brutal, but it was there. I remembered the argument. I had belittled her gallery, calling it her little hobby. Had my careless words, born of stress and exhaustion, been the final push? Did I, in my arrogance, drive her to this? The emotional dilemma was tearing me apart. Was I the victim of a cold, calculating woman? Or was I the cause of a good woman's desperate breakdown? My love for her and the mounting evidence against her were at war within me, and the battle was gutting me from the inside out. This internal turmoil made my time with Clara feel like a sanctuary. At work, the world was still logical. The museum project was complex and demanding, requiring all my focus. Clara and I fell into an easy rhythm, our minds working in sync. We spent long nights in the office, surrounded by the quiet hum of computers and the smell of coffee. Our conversations were a lifeline. We talked about everything and nothing, the genius of Louis Kahn, the frustrations of city bureaucracy, our shared love for old black and white movies. She never pushed, never pried. She simply created a space where I didn't have to be the man whose wife tried to kill him. I could just be Jimmy, the architect. One rainy Thursday, we were the last two in the office. The storm outside was furious, a reflection of the one in my heart. We had just solved a major structural problem with the museum's atrium, a moment of shared triumph. "We did it," she said, a rare, bright smile on her face. "You and me. We're a good team, Jimmy." In that moment, looking at her, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The feeling scared me. It felt like a betrayal of Janet, a betrayal of the love I was still clinging to. But it was also undeniably real. "Let me buy you a celebratory dinner," she offered, her voice soft. "You don't have to go back to that empty house just yet." I hesitated, the internal conflict raging. Going to dinner with Clara felt like a step across a line I hadn't even known was there. It felt like giving up on Janet. But the thought of returning to that silent, ghost-filled house was suffocating. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Just for a little while." The restaurant was a small, cozy place she knew. As we ate, the conversation shifted. For the first time, she asked about me. Not about the incident, but about my life, my dreams before everything fell apart. I found myself telling her about my childhood, about wanting to build things since I was a boy. She listened with an intensity that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a very long time. As she spoke about her own ambitions, I saw a reflection of my own drive, my own passion. There was an undeniable connection between us, a professional respect that was bleeding into something more personal. As she dropped me off at my house, she didn't immediately drive away. The car idled in the quiet street, the rain tapping gently on the roof. "Jimmy," she said, turning to me, her expression serious. "You don't have to carry all this alone. Whatever happened, it wasn't your fault. You're a good man. Don't let this destroy you." She reached out and squeezed my hand. Her touch was warm and steady. It was a simple gesture of comfort, but it sent a jolt through me. For a month, I had been adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. Clara's hand felt like an anchor. I got out of the car and watched her drive away, a profound and terrifying thought echoing in my mind. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe the Janet I loved was truly gone. And maybe, just maybe, Clara was my future. The thought was both a betrayal and a lifeline, and I didn't know whether to cling to it or run from it. The days that followed felt like walking on a knife's edge. My life was split into two irreconcilable halves. By day, I was the focused architect, working side by side with Clara. Our professional partnership was seamless, a dance of shared ideas and mutual respect that was becoming dangerously comfortable. The long hours we spent together were a respite, a pocket of normalcy where I could almost forget the wreckage of my personal life. Clara was a steady presence, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the emotional chaos that defined my marriage with Janet. There was a simple, uncomplicated logic to Clara that I found myself craving. With her, there were no hidden meanings or emotional minefields. A problem was just a problem, to be solved with precision and skill. This clarity was seductive. It made me feel capable and in control, feelings that had been stolen from me the night Janet disappeared. But when I left the clean lines and solid structures of the office, I would step back into the suspense and confusion of my other life. The nights were the worst. I would return to the house we had shared, and the silence would scream at me. Every object held a memory, a ghost of the life we had. I'd see the worn armchair where Janet used to curl up with a book, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the fabric, and the dam of my carefully constructed composure would break. The emotional struggle was a violent, internal war. One moment, I would be consumed by a wave of pure, unadulterated love for Janet, remembering her laughter, the way she'd grab my hand for no reason, the passion she brought to everything she did. In those moments, I was convinced of her innocence. She was lost, scared, and needed me. I would pore over old photos, my heart aching with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. How could I even think of moving on? My wife was out there somewhere, and I was her only hope. Then, the pendulum would swing. A call from Mr. Harrison with another damning piece of evidence would shatter my faith. He discovered that in the weeks before the incident, Janet had been acting erratically. She had sold a valuable painting from her gallery, one she had sworn she would never part with, for cash, well below its market value. She had also emptied our joint savings account, a sum of nearly $50,000, the day before she vanished. The money was gone, untraceable. The suspense was suffocating. Was she paying off her debts? Or was she building a nest egg for her new life, a life without me? The anger would then surge back, hot and blinding. The memory of her standing over me, the vase in her hand, would flash in my mind. The betrayal felt sharp and visceral. She had not only tried to harm me and abandon me, but she had also systematically dismantled the life I had worked so hard to build for us. In these dark hours, my feelings for Clara felt like a justified response. Clara was safe. Clara was honest. She represented a future free from the lies and violence that had destroyed my past. This emotional whiplash left me perpetually off balance. I felt like a traitor to everyone, including myself. When I was with Clara, sharing a laugh over a design flaw or a late-night pizza, a part of me would feel a pang of guilt, as if Janet were watching me, her heart breaking. I was betraying our 10 years of marriage. But then, when I was alone, consumed by my search for Janet, I felt like a fool. I was chasing a ghost, a woman who had possibly tried to murder me and had definitely stolen from me. I was betraying my own self-preservation, my own future, for a fantasy. The suspense was not just about finding Janet, it was about discovering which version of her was real. Was she the victim or the villain? And who was I in this story? The loyal husband or the gullible fool? The turning point came on a Friday night, about 2 months after Janet had left. Mr. Harrison called me with his most disturbing discovery yet. He had found a witness, a disgruntled employee from one of the loan companies Janet was indebted to. The employee claimed to have overheard a conversation. Janet wasn't just trying to pay them off, she was trying to hire them. She had offered them a substantial amount of money to stage a break-in at our house, to scare me, to make me believe she was in danger from them. But the plan had apparently gone wrong. The employee wasn't clear on the details, but he mentioned that Janet was furious with them, claiming they had gone too far. The information hit me like a physical blow. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. A plan. A staged break-in. It was all a manipulation. The suspense of the unknown was suddenly replaced by the horror of a twisted truth. She hadn't tried to kill me in a fit of rage. It was all part of a calculated, manipulative game. Why? To what end? To make me the hero who would save her from a manufactured threat? To make me feel so sorry for her that I would blindly pay off her debts without question? The sheer Machiavellian nature of it was staggering. It was more monstrous than a simple act of violence. It was a deep, psychological betrayal, designed to prey on my love for her. I stumbled out of my house, needing air. I walked for hours, my mind a maelstrom of fury and heartbreak. The love I had been clinging to felt like it was dying, being suffocated by the weight of this final, unforgivable deception. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Clara. "Are you okay?" her text read. "You left the office so abruptly." I stared at her name on the screen. She was the antithesis of all this darkness. She was clear, she was honest, she was real. In that moment of profound disillusionment, I made a decision. I texted her back. "Can I see you?" When I arrived at her apartment, I was a wreck. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside without a word. I didn't have to explain. I just broke down, and for the first time, I let myself truly grieve the death of my marriage. Clara just held me, offering silent comfort. Her presence was a solid, unwavering anchor in my world of chaos. As the storm inside me began to subside, I looked at her, her face etched with concern, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The suspense was over. I finally had my answer. Janet was not the woman I loved. She was a stranger, a manipulator who had used my heart as a pawn in her desperate game. And Clara? Clara was the one who was here, picking up the pieces. The decision to let go of Janet and embrace a future with Clara felt like the first solid ground I had stood on in months. It was a painful, gut-wrenching choice, but it was also a relief. The war inside me was over. I had chosen a side. I chose sanity. I chose a future that wasn't built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. My relationship with Clara deepened quickly after that night. It was as if a dam had broken, and all the feelings I had been suppressing came rushing out. We were no longer just colleagues, we were partners in every sense of the word. We finished the museum project, our combined efforts resulting in a design that was both beautiful and innovative, a testament to our synergy. We celebrated not just as co-workers, but as two people who had found each other in the midst of chaos. Life began to have color again. Clara moved into my house, and with her presence, the ghosts of my past life began to recede. She had a gentle but firm way of reclaiming the space. We painted the living room a warm, earthy tone, covering the wall that had witnessed so much trauma. She helped me pack away the last of Janet's things, boxing them up with a quiet respect that I was grateful for. She didn't try to erase my past, but she helped me put it away. The house, which had been a tomb of memories, slowly started to feel like a home again, filled with her easy laughter and the scent of her cooking. Michael, who had been so wary at first, saw the genuine happiness returning to my eyes. He and Clara got along well, and he finally admitted, "I'm glad, Jimmy. You deserve this. You deserve to be happy." For the first time in a long time, I believed him. I was happy. The second twist, the one that shattered my newfound peace and plunged me back into a darkness far deeper than before, came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 months to the day Janet had disappeared. It arrived in a plain manila envelope, delivered by a courier, with no return address. My name was written on the front in Janet's elegant, familiar script. My heart hammered against my ribs. Clara was in the shower, and I stood in the kitchen, the envelope in my trembling hands. I almost threw it away. I had moved on. I didn't want to reopen that wound. But I couldn't. I had to know. Inside were 2 things, a letter and a small, black USB drive. I read the letter first. "My dearest Jimmy. If you are reading this, it means I have failed. It means that my worst fears have come true, and I am either dead or I have been taken somewhere I cannot escape from. I know you must hate me. I know what you think I did. But I need you to know the truth. I never meant to hurt you. That night, our argument, it was my fault. I was stressed, scared, and I took it out on you. But when I picked up that vase, I wasn't going to hit you. I was going to smash it. I was going to smash it because it represented the beautiful lie our life had become. I was so buried in debt, so terrified of the men I owed money to, that I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't tell you. My pride, my stupid, foolish pride, wouldn't let me admit that my dream had become a nightmare and I was dragging you down with me. The man who hurt you was not me. He was in the house. He came for me, to send a message. I heard him break in while we were arguing. I tried to warn you, but you were so angry. When you turned, he stepped out of the shadows. He hit you. He hit you with the vase I had just put down. I screamed. He told me that if I went to the police, he would finish the job and kill you. He said I had 1 week to get him his money, and then I was to disappear. He said if I ever contacted you again, he would find you and kill you. So I ran. I emptied our accounts, sold everything I could, not for me, but to pay him off, to keep you safe. The story about me hiring them to stage a break-in, they must have planted that. It was their insurance, to make me the villain so you would never look for the truth. I love you, Jimmy. I have only ever loved you. My only goal this whole time has been to protect you. I gave this letter and the drive to a friend, with instructions to send it to you if she didn't hear from me by this date. If you are reading this, it means they came for me anyway. Please, don't come looking for me. Live your life. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted. The USB drive contains the proof. It's a recording. I'm so sorry. Forever yours. Janet. My world tilted on its axis. I stumbled to my laptop, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert the USB drive. A single audio file appeared on the screen. I clicked it. The sound of Janet's terrified voice filled the room, secretly recorded on her phone. Please, she was begging, her voice strained. I'll get you the money. Just leave him out of this. A man's voice, gravelly and cold, replied. He's your collateral, sweetheart. You want him to stay healthy, you pay up. And then you disappear. You breathe a word of this to anyone, you call the cops, you even send him a postcard, and we'll mail him back to you in pieces. You understand? Yes, Janet sobbed. I understand. The recording ended. I sat there, stunned into absolute silence, the sound of her sobs echoing in the quiet kitchen. It was all true. She wasn't a monster. She was a protector. She had sacrificed everything, her reputation, her freedom, her life with me, all to keep me safe. And I, in my ignorance and pain, had hated her for it. I had believed the lies. I had moved on. I had let another woman into her home, into her bed, into her husband's heart. The guilt that washed over me was a physical force, so powerful it brought me to my knees. I wasn't a victim who had found a new life. I was a fool, a traitor, who had abandoned his wife in her darkest hour. The sound of the shower turning off upstairs was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. Clara was about to walk into the room, a symbol of my happiness, a happiness that was now revealed to be the ultimate betrayal. The conflict wasn't over. It had just begun. And this time, the stakes were not just my happiness, but Janet's very life. The revelation from Janet's letter and the audio recording didn't just change the narrative, it detonated my entire reality. The floor of my kitchen felt like it had fallen away, leaving me in a free fall of guilt and horror. Every memory of the past 6 months replayed in my mind, now cast in a sickening new light. My anger at Janet, my resentment, my decision to move on, every step I had taken away from her was a step that pushed her deeper into danger, alone. My happiness with Clara, which had felt so earned and pure, now seemed like a grotesque monument to my own ignorance and betrayal. I had been celebrating my new life while my wife was living a nightmare, all to protect me. The sound of the bathroom door opening upstairs was like a starter pistol. Clara came downstairs a few minutes later, wrapped in a robe, her hair damp, a cheerful smile on her face. "Morning," she said, heading for the coffee machine. "You're up early." Her smile faltered as she saw my face. "Jimmy? What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," I whispered, my voice hoarse. I couldn't look at her. I just stared at the laptop screen, where the audio file was still open, a tiny icon representing the complete destruction of my world. The climax of my story was not a loud, explosive confrontation, but a quiet, soul-crushing implosion that happened right there in our sunlit kitchen. Clara came over and saw the letter in my hand. She read the first few lines, her brow furrowing in confusion. Then she saw the laptop. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cautious. "The truth," I said, and I pressed play. We stood in silence as Janet's terrified voice once again filled the room, followed by the cold, menacing threats of the man who had been hunting her. I watched Clara's face as she listened. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, and then to something else, something I couldn't quite read. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was heavier and more suffocating than any I had ever known. "Oh, Jimmy," she breathed, reaching for my hand. "That's horrible. I can't believe it." But I pulled my hand away. I finally looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who had saved me. I saw the woman who had replaced my wife. "You have to leave, Clara," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. Her face crumpled. "What? Jimmy, no. We can figure this out. This changes things, I know, but it doesn't have to change us." "Change us?" I let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "Clara, don't you understand? My wife, the woman I swore to love and protect, has been going through hell to keep me alive. And I abandoned her. I hated her. I let you into her home, into her life. There is no us. There is only what I have to do now." Tears welled in her eyes. "And what is that? What can you possibly do? She's gone, Jimmy. She told you not to look for her. It's dangerous." "I don't care," I said, my voice rising with a desperate energy. "I let her down. I failed her in every way a husband can fail his wife. I am not going to fail her again. I have to find her. I have to help her." The confrontation escalated, our voices rising in the quiet house. She pleaded with me to be rational, to think about my own safety. She argued that Janet had made her choice, that I had to respect it. But her words were just noise. The only thing I could hear was Janet's terrified sobbing on that recording. Every plea from Clara to stay, to think of our future, felt like another nail in Janet's coffin. My realization was absolute and terrifying. My comfort had come at the cost of Janet's safety. My peace was built on her terror. "Please, Jimmy, don't do this," Clara begged, her voice breaking. "I love you." Her words, which would have filled me with joy just an hour before, now felt like a shackle. "And I love my wife," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, because I had spent 6 months proving the opposite. "I need you to pack your things and go. Now." The finality in my voice must have reached her. The fight went out of her eyes, replaced by a look of profound hurt and resignation. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face, and turned and walked up the stairs. The sound of her packing was a funereal drumbeat marking the end of my second life and the beginning of a desperate, perhaps suicidal, mission. While she packed, I called Mr. Harrison. I explained everything, my voice shaking with urgency. I emailed him the audio file. For the first time since I'd met him, the cynical detective sounded genuinely shocked. "This is big, Mr. Hayes. Bigger than a simple debt. This is organized crime. Do not, I repeat, do not try to be a hero. Give this to the police. Let them handle it." But I couldn't. The police would be slow. They would be cautious. They didn't love Janet. They didn't owe her the debt that I did. I had to do something myself. I told Harrison to use every resource he had to find the man on that recording, to find the company he worked for, to find any trace of Janet. "Money is no object," I told him, my voice cold and hard. The man I was before, the cautious, logical architect, was gone. In his place was someone I didn't recognize, someone fueled by a guilt so potent it had burned away all fear. Clara came downstairs with her bags, her eyes red and swollen. She stopped at the door. "I hope you find her, Jimmy," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I really do." And then she was gone. I stood alone in the house that was once again empty, but this time the emptiness was different. It wasn't the emptiness of loss, it was the emptiness of purpose. The biggest realization was not just that Janet was innocent, but that I was complicit in her suffering. My passivity, my willingness to believe the worst, my selfish need for comfort, it had all enabled this tragedy. I had judged her for her supposed betrayal, but my betrayal of her was infinitely worse. I had broken my vows not with a single act, but with 6 months of willful ignorance. The climax of my story was this moment of terrible clarity. I was not the hero. I was not even the victim. I was the fool who had been dancing on the edge of a volcano, oblivious to the fire raging beneath. And now, I had no choice but to jump in. I looked at the picture of Janet on the mantelpiece, her bright, smiling face a painful reminder of what I had lost and what I had to get back. "I'm coming, Janet," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm coming." The final act of my life began with a single-minded, all-consuming purpose, to find Janet and destroy the people who took her from me. The guilt and shame that had crippled me were forged into a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer the grieving husband or the conflicted lover, I was an instrument of vengeance. I liquidated my assets, selling stocks, cashing out retirement funds, and putting my half of the architecture firm up for sale. Money was now just ammunition. I poured it all into Mr. Harrison's investigation, transforming his small-time operation into a high-tech command center focused on one target. Harrison, spurred by the danger and the sheer volume of cash, worked miracles. He identified the man's voice from the recording. His name was Leo, a known enforcer for a ruthless underground lending syndicate run by a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne's operation was notorious for its brutality and for making people disappear. They were the ones who had ensnared Janet, and they were the ones who held her now. The police, armed with my evidence, were building a case, but they were moving with institutional slowness, tangled in red tape and jurisdiction. I knew that by the time they were ready to act, Janet could be long dead. I couldn't wait. My ultimate revenge wasn't going to be a simple act of violence. Thorne had built an empire on financial ruin and fear. I decided to tear it down from the inside out, using my own skills, my precision, my logic, my understanding of structure. But this time, I wasn't building something, I was engineering a collapse. Harrison and I hired a team of freelance hackers and financial analysts, a small army of digital ghosts. Our mission was to uncover every dirty secret, every illegal transaction, every piece of leverage Thorne had, and use it to obliterate him. For weeks, I barely slept. I lived on coffee and adrenaline, staring at screens, tracing money flows, and identifying weaknesses in Thorne's corporate armor. We discovered he was laundering money through a series of shell corporations, including a high-end construction company. This was my way in. Using my professional credentials, I managed to get a meeting with Thorne's legitimate front, posing as an architect with a lucrative, untraceable offshore investment looking for a construction partner. Thorne, arrogant and insulated, saw only a new revenue stream. He didn't see the man whose life he had destroyed. The meeting took place at his corporate headquarters, a sleek, imposing skyscraper that was a monument to his power. Sitting across the table from him, I felt an icy calm. This was the man who had threatened to mail my wife back to me in pieces. I looked into his cold, dead eyes and felt nothing but the quiet hum of the impending demolition I had planned. While I kept him distracted with blueprints and investment jargon, my team was executing the attack. They initiated a series of cascading digital failures, leaking incriminating documents to federal authorities and investigative journalists simultaneously. They triggered margin calls on his leveraged accounts and funneled his liquid assets into an irretrievable cryptographic sinkhole. In the space of a single hour, Marcus Thorne's empire, which had taken decades to build, was rendered financially insolvent and legally indefensible. As alarms began to blare on his computer and his phone started ringing incessantly, a look of confusion, then panic, crossed his face. I stood up. "You took something from me, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the hell I had been through. "Her name was Janet Hayes. You might remember her." His eyes widened in recognition, and then narrowed in fury. He lunged for me, but his security was already being swarmed by federal agents who had been waiting for our signal. The last I saw of Marcus Thorne, he was being slammed against his own mahogany desk, his empire crumbling around him as the full weight of the law came crashing down. The resolution wasn't complete. Finding Janet was the final piece. In the chaos of Thorne's arrest, one of his captured lieutenants, hoping for a deal, gave up the location of a remote property where they held people who were problematic. It was a secluded cabin deep in the mountains, hundreds of miles away. I drove through the night, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Was I too late? Had she been there all this time? When I arrived at dawn, the cabin looked quiet, almost peaceful. I broke down the door, my gun, a purchase I never imagined I'd make, held tightly in my hand. The inside was sparse and dusty. And in a small back room, on a simple cot, was Janet. She was thin, pale, and her eyes were haunted, but she was alive. She looked up as I burst in, and for a moment, she just stared, as if I were another hallucination. "Jimmy," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. I dropped the gun and rushed to her, falling to my knees beside the cot. I couldn't speak. I just took her in my arms, holding her, tears of relief and profound sorrow streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry," I choked out, the words I had been desperate to say for months. "I'm so sorry, Janet. I know everything. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." She clung to me, her body trembling. "I knew you'd come," she sobbed, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." Her faith in me, even after my monumental betrayal, was the final, devastating blow to the man I had been. It was a grace I knew I would spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. Our closure was not easy. The trauma of what we had both endured left deep scars. But we faced it together. We left the city and the life we had known, seeking solace in a quiet coastal town. I didn't go back to architecture. Instead, I used what was left of my money to help Janet reopen her art gallery, a small, beautiful space that became a center for the local arts community and a symbol of her resilience. Our relationship was different now, quieter, more fragile, but forged in a fire that had burned away everything that wasn't essential. It was built not on a perfect foundation, but on the hard-won truth of our shared survival. The ultimate revenge was not Thorne's downfall or the justice served by the courts. It was this, sitting with Janet on the porch of our small house, watching the sunset over the ocean, her hand in mine. It was the quiet, defiant peace we had reclaimed from the ashes. It was the knowledge that we had faced the absolute worst in the world and in ourselves, and we had chosen each other. The story had a powerful ending, not because a villain was punished, but because a love that had been tested, broken, and betrayed had, against all odds, endured. And in its endurance, it had found its most profound and lasting strength.